Good afternoon or good morning. Welcome to today's webinar, the second one of today. Same subject though, of course, getting started in Capture One Pro 10. So today is really aimed at the beginners amongst you or those of you who just want to brush up a little bit, as we'll be taking it right back to the start and giving you a simple introduction into Capture One Pro 10, how to get some images in there, do some basic adjustments and do some exports. So if this is your first webinar and you don't know who you're listening to, my name's David. I'm part of the software sales team based out of Copenhagen in Denmark. And as usual, we have around 60 minutes today. We might go a tiny bit over to cover today's topic. You're very welcome and encouraged to ask questions throughout. If you look at the bottom of your GoToWebinar control panel on your Mac or PC, you'll see the last section is called questions, so you can put a question in there and that will come straight through to me. Equally, if you're watching on iOS or Android, there's a question mark icon at the bottom of the screen. Tap that and you'll be able to ask a question in the same way. I am recording the session, so you can always watch it again at your leisure on YouTube at a later date. Try to keep, for not only my benefit, but for actually everyone else listening, the questions on today's topic. And that will just help the flow of the webinar much better, as there is rather a lot of you. There's also James, my colleague, lurking in the background. He might have the opportunity to answer some questions on text as well. So let us begin. So just give me 1 second to shift a few screens and stuff around, and we should be good to go in a second. I'm also going to turn on the webcam. Let me just make sure we're looking at the right webcam so we don't see something horrific. And we can, whoops, turn that on like so. So just helps if you can see me, then I can always point to a few other things that I need to do every now and then. Okay, so should be able to see screen in front of you. You might see the cursor highlighted like this from time to time. If you have any issues with sound or the image not coming through properly, then it's best just to go through. A couple of you are saying the sound is not working. Can anybody hear me out there? Sound is working. Okay, so those of you, let me just do a message to those that can't hear. Glad that you can. Then I was a little bit worried today because GoToWebinar's been acting up. So I'm just going to send a message to those who can't hear to exit and come back in again. I think they made a software release on GoToWebinar today, and maybe that's upset the apple cart. Exit and come back in again. So let me just send that to all and we should be good to go. Okay. Let me just bring that back. Alrighty. Okay. So what we're going to do today, let's just get Capture One open. That always helps. As I said at the start before we had our little sound hiccup, we're going to kind of take it right back to the beginning, show you how to make your very first Capture One catalog, get some images into it, and make some adjustments, some of the basic stuff, and then get some of those exports out. Okay, so when you first start Capture One, you'll be presented with a few choices of how to run Capture One. So that's Capture One Pro, Capture One Pro for Sony, or Capture One Express for Sony. So if anyone out there is listening with a Sony camera, if you go for Capture One Express for Sony, then that's a free version, but with less features. For example, no tethered capture, no local adjustments, and a few other sort of missing pro features. For those of you who want to go pro with the Sony as well, then you can do so with Capture One Pro for Sony, but it only supports your Sony cameras again. The difference between Pro for Sony and Capture One Pro is only camera support. So if you use Sony, Nikon, etc., then you need Pro. If you're just a Pro user, then go for Capture One Pro for Sony. And the difference, of course, is the price. Express is free, Pro for Sony is $50, and Capture One Pro, the full license, is $299. If you have an older version, of course, then you can always upgrade for a lower cost. Okay, also when you first start Capture One, you'll see this little screen that pops up. One of those screens you often quite see in applications. Now, don't just immediately get in a huff and close it down, because there is some handy stuff on there, especially when you're in the trial period, because Capture One does have a full 30-day fully functional trial. That will lead you to some tips and tricks and tutorials and stuff like that. You can click on the arrows here to go through various other stuff, and it just helps you to get started with the Capture One. Also down the bottom, you've got the links to the blog, webinar sign up, newsletters, help page, and so on. So it's quite a handy little screen. Don't just dismiss it automatically. So what I said, the first thing that we're going to do is get you started with your own catalog. So I'm going to close this down. And before I do that, I'm actually just going to throw up a poll on screen. So your screen's going to change and you're going to see a poll in a second. And if you could just tick a box and answer that, that's great. Just helps me to shape the contents of the webinar. For those of you on Lightroom, I'll just point you towards some terminology that might sound a bit different in Capture One, but it's also very similar to Lightroom or Aperture, for example. So thanks for ticking the box. For those of you on 10, thank you very much. For those of you on 9, I'm sure we'll show you something that can inspire you to upgrade to. And as I said, for those of you on Lightroom and Aperture, I'll try to refer back as much as possible. Okay, I'm going to close that poll now. Let's go back to Capture One, like so. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to say File, New Catalog. So those of you on Lightroom, Aperture, and so on, you'll know this as the library, if you like. So let's say New Catalog. Dialog pops up. We need a name for our catalog. I'll just call this David's catalog. And underneath we've got location. So where do we want to store that catalog? And that's not the images, that's the database. So like Lightroom with its LRCat and Aperture with its library, this is the Capture One database that knows the location of your images and certain things about them like adjustments, metadata, and so on. By default, it will pop into the pictures folder. If you want to change that location, if ever you see a square with 3 dots in it, that opens an additional dialog, in this case, picking a location for the new catalog. So if we say choose, like so, and then we can say OK, and that will create my new catalog like so. Now there are other options for file management in Capture One. We can use a Capture One session, which you can just also use to browse. Jeannie, who's asking. So if you say File, New Session, then in the first tool tab, the folders area, you'll just simply be able to browse to a folder. So for Jeannie, for you, open up a new session. So now we're going to be presented with this window, which basically is a brand new empty catalog. If we look at how that looks in the Finder, if we go to Pictures, you can see that's what I've created now, a brand new empty Capture One catalog, David's catalog, as you can see. So now really the next obvious step is to import images into Capture One, of course. Now there's the rather obvious big button at the front here, Import Images, or we can say File, Import Images here in the display itself. So if we say Import Images, that pops up the import dialog like so, which is very simple to use. And really, as long as you get the first 2 points of the dialog working top to bottom on the left-hand side of the screen, import from and import to, it's very simple. Everything else is plain sailing. So import from, this is where am I getting my images from. So obviously this could be a camera memory card. It could be an existing location on your hard drive or on network storage, as Main is asking. Or in this case, I've just got a small, I don't think the cable's long enough, but a small, it's not going to reach. Oh, here we go, just see the corner of it. USB drive, which I've got some images on. I'm going to import from that location. So import from, let's choose that. So let's go to choose folder. Here it is, image drive. I'm going to image collections, and I just grab this small folder of images, Sony images, as it happens. Now, if you have an existing structure on your storage, whether that's external USB storage or network storage or whatever, then there's nothing to stop you targeting the top folder like so, and then checking this. It's obscured slightly. This box here, which is include subfolders. So then Capture One will drill down through all those different subfolders, import all of those images, and show you exactly how that structure looks in Capture One as it does in the Finder. But just for speed and convenience, I'm going to pick one folder like so and say open. So now we get a preview of basically the contents of what's in that folder. Next, import to. Where do we want to put those images? So we have a few choices here. We have current location. That simply means they will stay exactly where they are. There's going to be no copying, no moving, nothing. The images will stay as they are. The catalog database will just know exactly how to access them. So that's a good choice if you've already got images on your system somewhere, or they're on your hard drive on the computer and so on. So a good choice if you actually don't want to move any images and so on. For those of you on Aperture, or perhaps you've used iPhoto in the past or whatever, then we have this option which is inside catalog like so. So that's for managed images. So if you're used to using Aperture and you liked the managed image workflow, you can do exactly the same thing in Capture One, which simply means the images will be copied inside the Capture One catalog itself. Now that's good. It makes a catalog sort of very portable. You can move it around easily, but the limiting factor is obviously how much free space you have on the hard drive where it's stored. So I have 100 gigabytes left. As we know in this day and age, it doesn't take long to fill up 100 gigabytes. The third, probably most obvious option is choose a folder where we can choose anywhere on the available system, whether that's internal hard drives, external hard drives, and so on, to copy the images to. And that's obviously a sensible choice. If you're importing from memory card, you're not going to leave them on the memory card. Of course, that wouldn't make sense. So let's just, if for example, I set the pictures folder as the import folder, we get an additional option pop up here, which is subfolder. So this subfolder, for example, you'd been on a job or vacation or whatever you want to call it, you could manually type a folder in here, for example, and then Capture One would then make that folder for you. The benefit of that is that your destination folder, whenever you come back to Capture One to import more images, then you can just leave that as it is and create your own subfolders here, because the top root, if you like, of the folder is probably not going to change. It's the subfolders underneath that you're going to create. So you can either do that manually, and another thing which we won't go into too much today, that's for another lesson, is that you can ask Capture One to automatically create you a folder based on some kind of metadata. And you do that with the use of a Capture One token. So if you ever see this kind of graphic in Capture One, we call it a token. And what the token does is take some kind of metadata out of the image and use that to create a folder. So a very basic thing, if we scroll down, could be something like image date, like so. And then Capture One will automatically sort the images into different folders based on the date that they were captured in this example, but it could be anything. We could use the camera serial number, we could use some other metadata aspect and so on. And then Capture One will do that sorting for you on import. But for today, we keep it nice and simple. I'm just going to leave them in their current location like so. Everything else you see here is all bonus options. You can kind of ignore it, but it allows you to create a backup of the raw files, do some renaming, add some basic metadata, auto adjust the images, or add some kind of Capture One style or preset. But as long as you get import from, import to correct, then you're plain sailing. Before I say import all, let's just have a look at the questions. Let's see. Okay. If you don't want to see my face, Jeffrey, you can just turn it off. Okay. You can adjust the size of screen to webcam, or you can simply disable it. Okay. Um, let's see. Let's see. Just checking for other things. Okay. James is asking a few things, answering a few things in the background as possible. Is it easy to switch the catalog location? Yes. And one really nice thing to know about Capture One catalogs is that we treat them as a document, like a Word document or any other document. It's just simply when you're in Capture One, it's a file open. So wherever that catalog database is, doesn't matter. So if I wanted to move David's catalog somewhere else, I could, because that catalog is pointing to where the images are. So who was asking that? That was James. You can just move it wherever you like. So not a problem. We can't import from iPhoto libraries yet. It's got to be from Aperture or Lightroom, which is under, oh, let's go back to Capture One, File, Import Catalog, Aperture and Lightroom. We'll come back to that a bit later because there's a couple of things I want to point out. Can I just choose to import raw files if there's some TIFF folder files in the same location? Yes. So best thing to do is global filters, say always hide TIFF, for example, and then that way they won't show up in the import window. Or you could sort them by, maybe you could use one of the sort options here as well. Okay, let's say import all and let that process start, and you can see what happens. So once the import process is done, we'll talk about the interface, just how I name it, so you know what I'm talking about as we go through the hour. So you see the import is kind of done in that respect, nice and fast. What Capture One is doing now is creating a preview of every single image, which is stored in the catalog database. So you can see the database is gradually getting a bit larger as well. Now the purpose of doing that, like any application, Aperture and Lightroom does the same, is that when we're browsing from image to image, we don't have to always read the raw data. We can simply look at the preview file, which makes your browsing experience much faster. Now the size of that preview you can set as well. So if you look in the preferences, under image, you'll see preview image size here like so. Now you need to set this depending on the resolution of your monitor. So I don't have a big enormous 4K monitor, it's just a 2K monitor if you like. So by having the preview image size set to that, whenever I open an image up on my monitor, the preview is big enough for Capture One not to have to then read the raw data. If you've got a giant 4K monitor, for example, then that preview is going to be too small for the resolution of your monitor. Then Capture One will then have to read the raw file and present that on screen every single time you move to another image. So if you do have a big 4K monitor, go up to 3840. If you've got a big 5K iMac, then go up to 5120. And then that way Capture One's going to respond much, much faster. So just a little note. Now those previews are made in the background, so it doesn't prevent you from opening an image at any point and looking at it in Capture One. So it's a background task. They're also smart previews, which we'll come to a little bit later as well. So now we've got some images into Capture One, we can start to work on them. Before that, we just have a talk about the workspace and the default workspace. So if we go up to Window, Workspace, and Default, those of you new to Capture One, when you first open up Capture One, it's going to look like this. It's not modal. So if you're used to Lightroom and it's browse, develop, and so on, none of that exists in Capture One. I can be browsing and developing and processing and doing all that kind of stuff whenever I choose simultaneously. So the way we refer to our workspace is that on the left-hand side we have the tool tabs. So these are little clickable tool tabs which contain all our tools. In the center is the viewer, which has the currently selected image. And then on the right-hand side we have the browser, which has all our thumbnails. Along the top we have the toolbar, which contains action buttons that kind of turn something on and off. So for example, if I click this one up here in the top right, this turns on the grid lines. We could turn on our exposure warnings and so on. So some kind of action button. In the very center, we have the cursor tools, which change the behavior of the cursor. So for example, if I choose the crop cursor tool, then that gives me the ability to place a crop on the image. These are accessed by shortcut keys as everything else is in Capture One. So if I press V, I go back to the standard pointer tool, and C, I go back to the standard crop tool. Unlike Lightroom, I don't have to press enter to apply a crop. It's applied as soon as I draw it. So if I said deviate away from the crop tool, then it just simply shows me the view like so. So a little important thing to remember. Now the workspace that you see here is infinitely customizable by yourself. So if you're coming from Lightroom and you're so used to having tools on the right hand side, you can place the tools over on the right hand side and it will switch like so. If you're used to having the browser along the bottom, then you could say, where are we? Place a browser below, and then that will drop the browser down there. So all of that in that respect is infinitely customizable. Also for the toolbar up here, we can right click and say customize toolbar, and then you can choose to drag different buttons and so on onto the toolbar as well. If I just go back to my default workspace, I tend to try to work in the default, so if you're new when you open it, you're not going to wonder where the heck everything is. Also within this default workspace with the tool tabs, we can move the tool tabs to different locations. So if I hover on a tool tab, says command drag to reorder. On PC it will be slightly different, it will be an option drag. So if I do command drag like so, I can move that tool tab here. Within the tool tab itself, if you want to reorder what's here, it's just a simple case of drag and drop. So you can change the tool order, we can expand and collapse. We can also have a floating tool if you wish. And we can add or remove tools from that tool tab. So if we right click, we can say, let's just add a random tool like white balance, for example. If we want to get rid of a tool, then we can right click and we can say remove tool. And indeed, if we want to, like if you're never ever going to shoot tethered, doesn't make sense having a capture tool tab there. So let's just remove that entire capture tab. And again, that's just a right click, remove capture tab, like so, and it's gone. So spend a bit of time, spend a bit of time actually building a workspace that works for you, not the other way around. In terms of the browser as well and the other sort of dividers, we can move these dividers like so to make your thumbnail space bigger or smaller and so on. There's more customization possibilities. I won't go through every single one, but suffice to say, if you have a look in the view menu and go through all the various different options, then you can really create a workspace that makes sense. As you heard briefly, I spoke a little bit about shortcuts. For example, pressing C gives me the crop tool, V goes back to the standard pointer, Command B, for example, would hide my browser, Command B would hide the tools, and so on. If you go to Edit Keyboard Shortcuts, then you can edit all of that and change the maps as well. We're also going to start shipping via Phase 1 partners in January. This guy, which is a Logic keyboard, Danish company, that creates these nice colorful keyboards with a shortcut map on them, just to help you navigate Capture One. That's why you see Logic UK US in here as well. So we have a keyboard map specifically for those keyboards. One final thing on customization, you can also go to Viewer, and if you work with dual monitor space, if we pop that open, you can't see it, it's on my second monitor, but we can create a second viewer like so, which can also have its own tool set, for example, which you can also customize and so on. So for those of you working with dual monitors, you can create a really, really nice Capture One space. Once you've done that, of course, don't forget to say save workspace. Otherwise, you're going to lose all your hard work, of course. But just to give you, another example, here's my workspace purely just for color grading with the lovely, nice three-way color balance tool, which kind of makes sense to change workspaces for different tasks as well. But let's go back to the default so you're not all horribly confused. Okay, before we move on, let's just check questions. James is doing a great job in the background. Is there a list of pros and cons on using reference files? I personally would probably deviate to using reference files because then you're not limited by space on your catalog. If you fill up a hard drive full of images, then you can just start importing to another hard drive. You don't have to import images to always the same location. They can be spread across a number of different hard drives. So I would tend to recommend reference files. For smaller catalogs, which maybe don't contain that many images, managed file or managed catalogs are great because it's easy to move around. But if you're never going to move that catalog or send it to anyone, it kind of makes zero sense to do that. So I think referenced gives you more flexibility. Is there a tutorial from importing from Aperture? I think there is for Capture One 9 possibly, but it's very simple. You just say import catalog, Aperture or Lightroom. I would say if you're new to Capture One, sorry, I'll just show you where that is. If you're new to Capture One, don't make this the very first thing you do. If you've got 100,000 images in your Aperture or Lightroom library, just export a collection and then bring that into Capture One because you're learning a new application. It's always difficult remapping your brain to a different application, even though it's similar in some ways. So make that process easy. Start off with just 100 images, few hundred images, get to know the application, mess around with it. You can't break a raw file. We never edit the data in a raw file. So just enjoy the process. Don't make the first thing you do a massive import that's going to take 5, 6, 10, 24 hours, depending how many images you have. Make that stage 2. I've just got a new camera, etc., etc. Is it covered? I think the best way to know if your camera is supported is go to the Capture One section on Phase 1 and then look at supported cameras, and then you'll find a pretty up-to-date list of all the cameras there, for example. So just have a look at that. Let's see. James is doing a good job talking about sessions in the background. Sessions, as I said, is an alternative file management strategy. That's something we won't have time to talk about today, but at the end, if there's anything that we don't cover and you're not sure about, you'll pretty much find a resource on the listing that will answer that for you. Can we adjust the values of the exposure warning? Good question, Christopher. You'll probably find in Capture One you can adjust everything. It's a strength and a weakness. It means you can customize it very much to you, but it just gives you more options. So that's why it can feel like a bit more overwhelming. But again, we create the application for you, not the other way around. So under exposure, you can adjust your warnings here like so. So whenever you want them to pop in, Christopher. Okay, smart albums we're going to come to, and a few other bits and bobs as well. Oh, Derek from who made a really good Linda course is online as well. So yes, when we talk about external sources, remind me, Derek, that there's some third-party providers that have great courses on Capture One as well. Okay, let's kind of remember where we were, which we've just done an import, and talk about that, how that actually looks now in Capture One. So the very first tool tab is the library tab, and this is divided into 3 different sections. We have catalog collections, user collections, and folders. So if we start at the top, catalog collections are just simple shortcuts. So they point to every single image in the catalog, regardless of where we got it from. Recent imports, so the last 10 recent imports, which is handy if you say come back from a job or a trip with a bunch of CF cards and you do 10 different imports, then you'll see all those listed here. User collections, which is the really powerful part of a catalog we'll come back to, and folders. So this is the absolute location of where your images are. So if you remember those 10 minutes ago, whenever it was, we imported from image drive, image collection, Sony A7. So image drive, image collection, Sony A7. So this shows you the absolute path. If I was to import some other images, let's just grab some quickly. Let's choose just a little folder there. And let's say current location again. Let's import those. Then you'll see that we've got my two different folders here, and Capture One is generating those previews in the background. So all images is going to point me to every single image, and then I could look at specific folders in the folders tool there. Now, all of this is just simply drag and droppable, if that's a word. So if I want to move an image from this folder to this folder, I can simply do so, and you'll see it moved across wherever it is in there somewhere. So very simple, just to drag and drop like so, and then images will be moved. By default, you'll get a warning saying images are going to be moved. Just if you want to get rid of warnings, if you find them annoying, then in preferences, there's a whole bunch of warnings that you can turn off. See, I turned off my warn when moving images because really, I'm big enough to know when I'm doing that. So drag and drop between the two. Drag and drop to move folders around as well. So you can do that in Capture One 10 too. For the Aperture fans out there, if you are keen on working with managed images or both, if you want to, say, make an image managed from a reference one, you can just drag it to the catalog icon and it will move the file. It's never a copy, it's move the file inside the catalog. So that can be single images, or we could just do a shift select and then like so, those images are now inside the catalog, which does mean it's quite handy for taking images on the road, because remember those images were on an external hard drive, this one here. If this was a big bulky hard drive that I didn't want to carry, but I wanted to bring some images on the road with me on my laptop, then I can just drag them and make them managed, work on them when I'm away. When I get back home, I can just simply move them back like so to be a referenced image again like so. So it's very simple to go back and forth between that, as you can see. So now it moves it out of the catalog back to its reference location. If you can't see the full hierarchy when you try this at home, if you right click, you can say show folders hierarchy. Otherwise, you only get the root folder and its final destination, not everything else in between. So you might find that you prefer that because it's a more compact view. So I can say hide like so, or we can say show the complete hierarchy. There's a plus minus button up here for removing folders from the catalog, or for making the catalog aware of the folder. It's not a cheeky shortcut import process. If you want to import images into the catalog, use the importer. That's what it's there for, and give rise to those extra options. But if you want to make a folder aware, let's say plus. Let's say we want to make a new folder called whatever, my selects. Create that folder and then add it. Capture One is now aware of that folder, and I could move images to it like so if I wished. So all that kind of basic stuff you can do very comfortably within Capture One if you wish. If you start moving images around in the Finder or Windows Explorer, you're going to break, if you like, that connection from the database to the image itself. So if you do that, you either need to right click on an image and say, where are you? There we go, locate. It's grayed out because Capture One knows where the image is. Or you can right click on entire folders and say locate if you happen to move a folder as well. Now I would suggest not doing that. If you try to do operations within the catalog as much as possible, then it's generally faster than doing it in the Finder or the Explorer and then fixing what you've done in the catalog. Just try to do what you need to do in the catalog. And if you have a good, robust import routine, then that helps a lot by, for example, the strategies we spoke about automatic folder creation. So if you have a good strategy for that and a clear idea of how you're going to organize before you import, then you can avoid this kind of then having to rejig everything you've done after the import. Again, as well as locate, you can also right click on a folder and synchronize it as well. So if you've added images to a folder from a memory card or something, you can then synchronize. It's kind of, again, a round the back way to import, but I would suggest using the import dialog as much as possible, because then you can do the smart organization, renaming, and adding your metadata and other things which could be useful as well. So that's a little piece on the folders area, but the real power is in user collections, because it's all very well organizing at system level, but it means that images can only ever belong in one location, unless you go through the highly dangerous, crazy notion of duplicating raw files if you want them to exist in two places. Let's say you had a folder which was like your best portfolio stuff. And this was one of my portfolio winning images, and I wanted to move it here, for example, then it's gone from its original location, because we never want to duplicate raw files. But with user collections, which use the power of a database to organize, you can do a lot more intelligent stuff. So I'll show you a few examples, how we're doing for time, and then we move on to the adjustment stuff. Before we do that, let's check questions. James, you're doing a great job again. Workflow for multiple people. If you want to share a catalog, that's a good reason to use Capture One. So generally, let's say I'm currently got this catalog, David's catalog, open. If you, Patricia, from your computer browse to this location and try to open it, Capture One would say David is using the catalog. You can't use it right now. So if one person has it open, somebody else is prevented from opening it, because you can imagine that if two people trying to work on the same image at the same time, it's not optimal. What you can do is say lock the catalog, and then it becomes right here, read only, and then multiple people can open it at the same time. You just can't do anything, you can't make adjustments, but you can export. So normally only one person can open it, lock it, multiple people can open it, read only. So that's really super handy. Dick sets up user collections before import, saves a step. That's a good point actually, Dick. We will come back to that. Is it better to have smaller catalogs or one large one? It's kind of up to you, really. There is no sort of right or wrong answer on that. Some people just have one massive catalog with everything in it. Other people break it up like by client or genre or year or something like that. I mean, the advantage of having one massive catalog is that you can search for your entire body of work, if you like. The disadvantage of that, of course, is if you have some terrible disaster at home and you spill your tea, coffee, whatever, where is it, on your hard drive, and you ruin it. If you haven't backed up, then you've lost a huge body of work. But if you have backed up, then it's okay. But of course, there's always the possibility that the backup can break too, and then you're really screwed. So smaller catalogs, it's a safety thing. Me personally, I'm probably going to go to one catalog per year. Because that will encourage me to be a bit more organized. And again, the latency of losing sort of one massive catalog, like if this office burnt down that I'm sitting in, then basically I lose everything because I don't have an offsite backup, which you definitely should, for example. Okay. Manfred says, we need to see the new features of 10. Well, if you remember, Manfred, this webinar was sold as a getting started. This is for beginners and experienced alike. If you want to know what's new in 10, then that was a couple of weeks ago, that webinar. So you can always watch the recording for that to find out what's new. Pretty much though, user collections, let's just do a little bit on here. So as I said, this is the real sort of power of using a database. So I'm on all images. Let's just make something really basic, which I'm sure you'll understand is an album. So let's say we're going to make a Las Vegas album. Then we can simply drag single images, or if I do a shift select, a group of images into the collection like so. And then that just gives me a nice easy collection which I can get back to. Let's go back to all images, and then we can make something called a smart album, which you don't personally drag images to. It populates itself based on some search criteria. So if we had something like 5-star images, like so, and you can either make your search criteria here by rating, must equal 5 stars, for example, or there's some handy presets based on rating and color tags up here. So let's say we want a smart album to fill itself based on 5-star images. Right now it's empty because nothing fits that criteria. But if I use number 5 on my keyboard just to tag a few images as 5-star, now when we look at this smart album, it's automatically populated. So smart albums are a great way to, monitor certain aspects of your photography or image collection. The last one we look at, or second to last, is a project, which has some similarities to projects in Aperture. Not identical, but similar. So let's call this Vacation 2016 again, for example. Now, if I try to, I can't drag images into a project. It is not an image container in itself. So if we right click, I can say new inside and put an album inside. And there's a very good reason for this, which you'll see in a minute. So let's say all images. Whoops. Again, I can't type today. So let's pretend I went to Norway and Vegas, for example. Let's just make those a bit smaller. Let's drag those into all images like so. Then, of course, in that project, I could have another album. Let's say Norway. And just grab a few Norway ones like so. And here as well. So basically we can have the same images living in different locations. Now the real power of the smart album, of course, is that we can now target this smart album just to search within the project itself. So I'll show you exactly what I mean. If I right click, say new inside smart album, we do the same thing, 5-star. We use my handy preset like so, say OK. And now if any images in this project fulfill that criteria, it will show here. But see that if we look in my 5-star images here, that there's 2 extra images because this album is searching the entire catalog, smart album. This smart album searching the entire catalog. This smart album is only searching within the project. So that gives you more scope for some clever stuff with user collections. The last one is called a group, and that's just basically a folder. Because you can imagine that area could get quite long once you have lots of different projects. So then you can just divvy up those projects as you like. Okay, let's move away from that. If you want to know more about catalogs or other stuff, I'll point you to where we need to go at the end. So now we've got wonderful images inside Capture One. We're going to want to do some adjustment and so on. So if we go to our first sort of adjustment tab, it kind of runs left to right in a basic workflow. The reason why the lens corrections tab features early on is that new for Capture One 10, who was asking, that was Manfred. New for Capture One 10 is a diffraction correction box. So checking that will take into account the aperture and the lens that you use to take your image and correct for any optical diffraction caused by small apertures. So if you're shooting at like f2.8 or whatever, there's no benefit to having this on. But if you're shooting at smaller apertures, f16, f22, then it will help clean up that softer image caused by smaller apertures. The reason why we don't turn it on by default is that it will increase processing time. So it's your choice whether you have it on or not, but it does give a noticeable improvement to smaller aperture images. Unlikely you'll see it on the webinar broadcast because you're only looking at 8 frames a second and lower resolution, but it certainly does help when you get to the smaller apertures. So most of the tools we can find are in the color tool tab and the exposure tool tab. I'll just bring a tool out front here so we can look at it in detail. I'm sure you're all smart enough to figure out how a slider works. So of course, dragging the slider adjusts the image. If you double click a slider, it resets to 0. If you click on the name of the slider and hold, then it just gives you a temporary before and after. If we just mess up these sliders and we click on the little backwards arrow, that resets the entire tool. Unlike Lightroom, there is no checkbox which turns the effect of that tool on and off. But if you option click, then you can see before, and after, like so. So option click the reset tool will give you that before and after of that particular tool. So it's very, very handy. Question mark takes us to the help site for that particular tool, which can be very handy. A does an auto adjustment for the image based on sort of various image data. We've got a copy and apply, which we'll come to shortly. The 3 stacked vertical lines allow you to look at factory presets or save your own presets for a given tool. And the final option, the submenu, allows you, for example, to save defaults for a particular camera. So if you're a Nikon D810 owner and you always like a bit less saturation or a bit more saturation, then you can save that as a default for that camera. So every time a new image comes along, from that particular camera, it will use those defaults and not the Capture One defaults. So you'll find all the tools have all those various different little icons at the top. So help, auto, copy and apply, which we'll come to, reset, alt click to temporary reset, presets, submenu, like so. Now contrast, or I should say the adjustments in here, you probably think you know what they do. But there's some intelligence built into the bottom 3, and of course the exposure tool as well. If you want to correct for exposure, then exposure slider is the best one for that. Not brightness, not the levels tool, whatever, it's the exposure tool. When it comes to contrast, there's quite a complex algorithm in the contrast slider, which does of course help to increase contrast, but also keep the color and the saturation relatively constant as well. When we look at the curve tool, then that will become a bit more obvious. But the contrast slider, don't be bashful or ashamed about using a slider called contrast. It actually does a really nice job of doing that, increasing or reducing contrast. So don't be afraid to use it. Brightness bumps up the midtones, but again, it has some care in helping to limit what's going on with the highlights. And finally, saturation is probably in Lightroom users out there much more similar to something like vibrancy, because if we bump up the saturation, colors that are already sitting at the higher end of the saturation range get less treatment than those at the lower end of the saturation range. So it avoids colors becoming too heavily saturated, basically. So saturation a bit closer to vibrancy in that respect. Let's drop you back over there. High dynamic range, I'm sure you can figure out what that does. Let's just reset this image. Oh, that wasn't the one. Oh, Anthony was asking, can I use cursor keys? Yes. If you highlight the box, you can tab through and then you can change values using the cursor keys, or if you have a scroll mouse, for example, you could do the same thing as well. So yes, it is possible. Highlight or high dynamic range, you can guess what happens as you drag the slider to the right. Then we help to improve highlight detail. Shadow slider, when we drag that to the right, we can lift the shadows up as well. So nothing revolutionary to know there, except that it works very, very nicely and you can push it pretty hard. The levels tool, very similar to what you're used to working with in Photoshop, if you're a Photoshop user. So it has a shadow slider, highlight slider, and a midtone slider. Ideally, you're looking to drag in the endpoints to fit your histogram nicely and use the midtone slider to darken or brighten your midtones. But it behaves in a very similar way to the levels in Photoshop. So very simple to use and intuitive. Always worth having a look at the levels tool to see if you can make some improvements. Curve tool, we spoke about the contrast tool a bit earlier. So let me tell you, explain exactly what I'm talking about. Let's get something that's relatively well saturated from the outset. Yeah, let's just grab this image. So using a standard RGB curve, which you'll find, of course, in most applications, if I throw in a curve to this image, and I'll be relatively aggressive so you can see exactly what's going on. Now looking at the color of the blue sky, if I just option click to reset that, see by increasing the contrast, the color has also gone up as well, like the saturation level has increased. I'll just make a virtual copy. So in Capture One Speak, that's a new variant. So I'll make a new variant of the image. So that's the one with my curve. And then this one we change to Luma mode, which is luminosity only. So that means we can affect the contrast, but without affecting the color. So it's very useful for actually all aspects of photography. So if we compare the two, remember this one is on its RGB curve, this one is on its Luma curve. So you can see even though our contrast has gone up, the color has remained stable. So this has all kinds of great uses for landscape work, portraiture, people, fashion, beauty, and so on, because you can manipulate the contrast without affecting the color. And that really is what the ethos of Capture One is about, that the adjustment that you make is very precise. It doesn't sort of damage some other adjustment that you've done, which you then have to fix or rescue. So if you want to add contrast, then the Luma curve is a good choice because it's totally separate to the color and the hue. If, of course, now I decided, well, I'd like a bit of saturation, then I could just use the saturation tool to add that. But it gives me the choice of deciding between contrast and saturation. Incidentally, quite a lot of people like to in their workspaces is to have two curve tools. There's nothing to stop us doing that. Let's make that bigger. So we can have one always open as RGB and one always open as Luma, like so. So then again, you have the choice. If you actually want a bit of contrast, saturation boost, then you can use RGB. If you want to keep it separate, then you can use Luma. So it's nice to have two curves like that. Okay. How are we doing for time? 10 minutes. Okay. So you'll find all the basic stuff in the exposure tool tab. Mine went blank there for a minute. The last two down the bottom, clarity and vignetting. So the clarity tool does a great job, surprisingly, not surprisingly, of adding, oops, Command B to hide the browser, of adding clarity to an image. Clarity is a mid-tone contrast adjustment, so it doesn't affect the shadows much, doesn't affect the highlights much, but in Capture One you can actually push that pretty hard. See, that's maximum clarity with still nice effect. If we just option click, you can see before and after. There are four methods of clarity which might sound a little excessive, but they all have a slightly different job of affecting the mid-tone contrast. So natural is your go-to one. So that gives you a nice contrast boost, but without messing up the colors or changing the colors. Punch, let me just find a better example. Go over there, something with a bit of color in it. So let's just bump up the clarity. Punch does a similar thing, but we might see a slight change if you look at the colors in the lighting there. What Punch does is just up the saturation a little bit as well to give you some punch, funnily enough. Neutral is somewhere in between these two, slightly different method, and classic is an old Capture One 6 method actually for adjusting clarity, which I don't like pretty much, but it's there for legacy support. So your go-to one is natural. Structure is, let's see if this image is in focus. Yes, nice and sharp. Structure is not a mid-tone adjustment. It's basically great for adding sharpness and edge detail to anything which has that fine structure like architecture, landscape, animals, fur, feathers, that sort of stuff. Not good for portraiture because it would make obviously details, unshaven, wrinkly faces, bring out a lot more detail. So structure is great for that kind of architectural detail. If we just cancel that and then bring it back in, just makes everything jump out a bit more. And finally, if we drop in some vignetting, then obviously vignetting applies a creative vignette to the image. So all your basic stuff, and you can do a lot really with white balance, of course, in the color tool tab, and all the exposure tools in the exposure tool tab, you can achieve a huge amount with adjustments to your image without really exploring anything further, because you've still got all the options in the color editor, which is going to be next webinar, all the options in the color balance tool, which you saw briefly, and black and white opportunities and so on. So there's way more that you can exercise within Capture One. How are we doing for time? Okay, before we finish shortly, we'll have a look at copy and apply, so you know how that works, and then exporting out to final formats. Before we do that, we just have a quick check from questions. James doing a sterling job in the background as well. Tim says, can you set the diffraction correction to come on automatically at certain apertures? No, it's not a bad idea though, actually, but you could save a preset and then just apply that preset when you felt necessary. But it's really one of those adjustments that it's good to make an informed decision on whether I want to use it or not. As I said, you don't want to turn it on for everything because then your processing time is going to go up. And in this case, I would think at F8 on this image, if we turn it on, you know, there's barely much difference. But on a shot, say at F22, it's remarkable how much extra detail you can get up. Let's see. How to repeat how you set a default for your camera in any of the tools or most of the tools, adjustment tools. On the sub menu, you can say save as defaults for XX. So if you like plus minus saturation or whatever for your camera, you can then save as defaults. Does levels work on Luma only? No, it's RGB. Standard levels operation. But you can access the individual channels, but you are working the levels is on RGB, not luminosity. Can I save my curves for future purposes? Yes, any tool you can save a preset, and then you can always go down and then preview your presets like so. So yes, you can. So curves on Luma is probably better than levels. Well, not really. I would say that it's always a good idea to look at what your levels tool can do because it gives you a good sort of visual indication. It's very easy to then set the endpoints. You can do the same in the curve tool as well by changing endpoints, and you can see the levels over the top. But I think it's good practice and good image practice to have a look at the levels to see if you can improve on it. Let's see. Okay. Structure good for smoothing skin. Negative clarity and negative structure can help for smoothing skin, but good on a local adjustment mask, which is something for another day as well. Okay. Alrighty. Okay. Let's have a look at copy and apply, I said before. So let's just say we've got these images here, which are relatively similar. So let's grab the first image and make some adjustments. So let's take our straighten tool, cursor tool, which is this one here. Draw, whoops, not that. Draw along the horizon to straighten it a little better. That's more like it. Let's just have a play around with the levels and have a touch more. Well, actually, no contrast. Let's lower the saturation a bit for fun. Let's go to our color balance tool. Why not? Great tool. Basically, pick my hue and pick my luminosity for shadows, midtones, and highlights. Really nice tool for all kinds of things. And then finally, let's press C for crop. Just going to change the crop slightly. Okay, so now we've got our look on this image and we want to get that across to all the other images. Very simple. We say copy. Whoops, not a right click. Oh, my Wacom is stuck on right click. Why is that? There we go. So now we say copy up here, and then instantly in the styles and presets, sorry, adjustments tool tab, everything gets ticked, which is part of that adjustment. So I did my exposure, levels, color, balance. You can see we applied a crop and so on. Now all I need to do is shift select all the other images I want, and you guessed it, press apply like so. And then now that adjustment is copied across to all the other images. So very simple, copy and apply. Let's reset these ones here. So Command R to reset, or you can use the big reset icon here. So that will reset everything back to 0. So let's do the same thing again. Let's copy, but let's say this time I don't want to apply the crop. So all I need to do is uncheck it from here, like so, and then shift select my other images. And now when I say apply, then it applies the color look and so on, but doesn't apply the crop. So very handy. You can always disable anything once you've sent that to the clipboard. We mentioned briefly copy and apply in the tool itself. So let's look at that in a different context. So let's say you've gone through tons of images, you've done all your adjustments, and you thought, rats, I've forgotten to set the sharpening, or I wanted to make some other change, for example. So down here, let's just adjust the sharpening. I can preview it in the focus tool if I wish. So I'm going to boost up the sharpening a bit. New for 10, Manfred. Halo suppression. So if we've been quite aggressive with our sharpening, we can use halo suppression to help remove those kind of over sharpened artifacts that can pop up with unsharp masking. So if I want to get just this sharpening value to all the other images, I can press copy here, and everything will be ticked that I just adjusted. So that's automatically done for me. And then as soon as I say apply, it's going to apply it to all these other images as well. So if we choose this one, for example, you can see the sharpening levels have changed. So let's just drop this back down, press copy, and then apply. Choose this one again, and you see the sharpening levels have altered. Now, to make that even faster, if you trust yourself that Capture One's just going to help you in the background, if you hold the Shift key down and click this, then it instantly applies it. So now if I go to this one, you see it's got those new values. This works with any tool, so it's actually a really handy way to kind of borrow a crop or rotation from one image and send it to the other. So if we find our crop tool right here, and I shift click this one is my primary with the thick white border. If I shift click that, then it's going to send that crop to all the other images. So if I did a little rotation, let's just rotate that one. We do quite an aggressive one so you can see. Shift click the up down arrow, and then it's applied like so. So if I now reset just the crop here, then it will reset on all those images like so. So that's a really handy way just to do a simple copy and apply across from all those images. So copy apply all, not forgetting you can always uncheck something here. And then copy apply some with the copy apply icon in the tool itself. Okay, I think that's a good thing to cover because that's something all of us probably do with images at some point. Stuart says, who's a reseller in the US? Well, there's hundreds in the US. And if you want to find your partner, the best thing to do is just go to find a partner on the website, and then it will point you in the right direction wherever you live. Ricardo says, that's a beautiful place. Where is it? Well, that's Vegas. Don't know if Vegas is beautiful. This is Lofoten in Norway, which my friend Damon went to and kindly lent me these pictures. Okay, last thing that we look at is final exports. There's two ways to do this in Capture One. There's the kind of basic way, which I would say is probably not worth bothering with. You might as well use the clever way, but I'll show you anyway. So you would select the images that you would want and say File, Export, Variants like so. That pops up a dialog where you can pick a location, decide on whether you want TIFF, JPEG, and so on, and then click your export. So that's pretty easy and intuitive to figure out. There's some additional tabs here which you can choose to do various things. But if you're smart, then you'll use, then you'll use the process recipes in the final output tool tab over here. Now, the beauty and the wonderful thing about process recipes is that you can run multiple recipes at the same time. And those images can either go to a common location or they can go to all different locations. So you can imagine the possibilities. You could have your final images going to your internal hard drive. You could have smaller images going to cloud storage, for example. You could have web-sized images going to a different location to upload to your Webspace and so on. By default, Capture One will appear with about 8 or so recipes, but if you want to make your own recipe, it's just a case of clicking plus and then defining the recipe. So let's actually remake that one. So let's say with our images, I want to have an 80% quality JPEG, like so, and I want to have a full-size TIFF, 8-bit TIFF, and I want to resize the image down to, let's say, certain number of pixels across. Let's make one for Instagram, for example. So we're going to have Instagram. We want to have JPEG. We're going to do sRGB. We know the width on Instagram has to be, I think now we can do 2048 pixels, like so. So now we've set up a recipe specifically for Instagram. Now let's just open up, because we'll show you a very cool thing in a new feature in Capture One 10. So if you move through these various tabs, the File tab decides on the destination of that export. Now if it's set to output location, Capture One will simply look what's set in the output location tool. So this, by having output location set, it means your process recipes can go to a common location. Um, Otherwise, I can select any folder here and send that to any location. So like me for Instagram, I post that to a Dropbox folder so I can then get to it on my phone, because Instagram is a pain and you still have to use your phone to upload, for example. So that could be a good case for sending it to a different location. Now under adjustments, we can ignore the crop if we wish. Great if you're sending to Retouch, a full-size 16-bit file, or we can apply some additional sharpening for screen or for print, because whenever we rescale an image, there's some negative impact to the sharpness. So let's look at this image at 100%, like so. So we can see it's nice and sharp, but we're going to output this at 2048 pixels. Now Capture One will rescale that and do a really nice job, but there's always going to be some negative impact on the sharpening, and I really don't know what that's going to be, and I don't know what size JPEG quality is best to set at until Capture One 10, because if we turn on proofing up at the top, then that will instantly set the image to the output dimensions, which is 2048 pixels across, like so. So that's exactly how it's going to look when processed. Now I can accurately think, well, adjustment wise, do I need some extra sharpening? We could throw a little bit of extra sharpening in, like so. I could think, well, JPEG quality, there's no point having it set to 100 because we're not going to see the benefit of that. If we look at the process summary, I can see that I'm going to be left with a 2 megabyte file. But by dragging the quality down, you see this file size gets smaller, and we can get to a point where really I can probably get away with a pretty low JPEG quality and still get a nice image at 2000 pixels across. So now we can optimize our output really nicely. I mean, if we compare that with disabling all the sharpening, then you see it really loses a lot of that edge acutance and definition. So if we put our output sharpening for screen back on, boom, super nice sharp picture, but without being over sharp. So we can accurately see exactly what our output's going to look like when our proof view is on. When proof view is on, a couple of things might take longer to happen because we're processing the output on the fly, as you can imagine. So now I'm done, I'll turn proofing off, and then let's just go back to fit screen. So we've got 3 process recipes going like so. I'm going to choose an output location. So let's choose a folder, let's just have exports here. And something for you guys to think about, 3 different process recipes running. Now under here for subfolder, like if you remember way back an hour ago for the import folder, we could ask Capture One to automatically create us an import location. We can also ask Capture One to automatically create us an export location. Again, this could be based on date, it could be based on some metadata, um, could be based on star ratings, color tags, all kinds of stuff. But in this case, let's, sorry, I'll show you how to find it. Click on the box with the three dots, and this brings up all the different location tokens that we can use. So the one that I was going to use was called recipe name. So let's drag and drop that up there and say OK. And now Capture One will make a folder based on our recipe name. So it's very easy to see which image is which. So let's pick let's pick 3 images like so. And if we want to go to our export folder, we can just click that arrow. So we're ready to go. Just close that one. And let's say process, which of course can be a shortcut as well. Go back to our Finder. See, Capture One's made us our first folder, JPEG 80%. And there's our image at JPEG 80%. There's our 8-bit TIFF. There's our Instagram image, which has been resized down to 2048 pixels with our additional output sharpening and so on. So that's just a real simple example of how Capture One can help you by automating a really boring task of making folders, for example. You can extend on from that by placing a /, which will give you another drop down in the hierarchy to then make another automated folder. So we could have done process recipe name and then star rating. So like this, if I start typing rating, okay, so then we would get the process recipe name and then a folder based on the star rating like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 0, and then the images. So you can do pretty nice stuff, powerful stuff in there, which will save you lots of time. So there we go. That kind of wraps up the sort of end of the workflow. I would strongly recommend you use process recipes because it's just much more powerful than saying file export variants. And once you have those process recipes set up, it also gives you consistency because then you're always going to be processing to the right file format, dimensions, JPEG, quality or TIFF compression and so on. You don't have to every single time go into the dialog and think, well, now I need JPEGs, so I've got to change this back to JPEG and the quality and then adjust my output sharpening again and so on. So use process recipes. It costs you a tiny amount of time in setting them up, but it'll save you billions of hours from thereafter in your processing tasks. Let's just go back to our output folder. So there's our 3 shots. Whoops. Come on, Finder. Wake up. So there's our help if I use the right keys. So there's our 3 shots. As you can see, Instagram, JPEG, and TIFF like so. Last look at questions, and then I will show you some additional resources. Tim says he likes the team approach to question answering. It's great. When there's such a lot of you, which there is today, it really helps to have 2 of us attacking questions because otherwise it's really difficult to handle everything. Let's just look at the last few. How did I straighten? Jeannie said. Use the straighten cursor tool up here. Grab that. Draw along your horizon or vertical. Let go, and then it will rotate about that point. Okay. When will the webinar end up on the website? Probably tomorrow sometime. You'll get a follow-up email in an hour's time with a link to the playlist, but it just won't be there right away. So we'll be there a little bit later. Can we save exported images as presets? Well, I don't quite know what you mean, Andrew, but the recipes are always going to be there globally in Capture One. If, for example, you wanted to save a preset, whoops, let's come out of the straighten tool. That looks good. If you wanted to save whatever look as a preset, then you would just go here and then we could say save a style, and that would save everything we've done about that image. Andrew says, why 300 resolution and not 72? It's actually irrelevant, really, because we're displaying pixel for pixel. So the resolution really doesn't make much difference in that respect. When importing DNG by Lightroom, will metadata be saved? I think it is. My advice would be to try it, but metadata is shown in the metadata tab here, like so. But just give it a whirl, export one and import and see what happens. Um, Helen's giving me a sad face. Why is that, Helen? I hope it's nothing I've said. Um, any chance of a holiday sale on upgrading? Sorry, Tim, 10's just been launched, so it's very unlikely it's discounted at this early stage. But if you hunt around, you'll probably find a Capture One ambassador or partner giving some discounts. Okay. Helen says she loves version 9. That's great, but version 10's even better. You've got more performance, more speed, the proofing that you saw there, totally new sharpening tools, support for the amazing tangent device, which was last week's webinar, and a whole bunch of other stuff as well. Okay, but you don't have to upgrade, of course. We'd love it if you did, but version 9 still works, and it will do so forever. Okay, just for some other resources, if you go to Products, Software, Capture One Pro, look in the little menu here and look for the Learning Hub. And then that basically gives you a nice overview of simple adjustment guides, which are really fun. They're just 2 3-minute videos of images being processed by various different photographers. So that will take in kind of a whole bunch of different adjustments in Capture One. We've got the tutorials, which you can see there as well, which more will come as well. If you go to our blog, blog.phase1.com, there's some great resources there for various different writings, guest photographers, myself, James, who's lurking in the background, and my other colleagues too. There's our YouTube channel. Whoops, stop that playing. There's a YouTube channel, and if you scroll down, you'll see one of the first playlists is tutorials. There's the webinars, which you'll see this one pop up there sometime tomorrow. If you subscribe to the channel, then you'll get a notification too. There's also help.phase1.com as well, which is the written help for Capture One. So in roughly an hour's time, you'll get a follow-up email which will have all of that stuff in there. So if you've been scribbling that down frantically, save your pen. And also a few other resources too as well. There's also the list of all the webinars in January and February. So if you want to sign up, then grab your seat now. Then you can do so in that follow-up email as well. If you want to know what's happening next week, let's just bring back Keynote for a second. Play. Where's the play button? Like so. 5th of January is the next one. Even I have to have Christmas off. So that's going to be working with color. So you didn't see much on color today, but the tool you see in the center of the screen, the color editor, one of the jewels in the crown of Capture One. The color balance tool you briefly saw today, but we'll spend a lot more time on talking about color in general with Capture One as well. So look out for the sign up link in the follow-up email, which you'll get soon. So many thanks for your time today. Sorry we couldn't get to every single question. There was rather a lot of you, but we did our best and tried to answer the more common ones. Okay, so many thanks for your time and hope to see you all in January. Have a great Christmas break or your holiday break, whatever that may be, and see you all soon. Take care.